meeting of Lake Forest Community High School, District 115, Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, December 4th, 2012. May I have a roll call, please?
Snoblin?
Here.
Mr. Edson?
Here.
Mr. Black? Mr. Scribner? Mr. Burgener?
Here.
Mr. Carey?
Here.
Mrs. Golan?
Here, thank you. All right, we'll do the text. Yes. We want to welcome everybody to our special holiday edition of the Board of Education for Lake Forest High School. Best meeting of the year.
Songs
Mr. Haskett, is there a few words you'd like to say? Mr. Haskett.
Thank you so much.
You'd like to say a few words? Okay, I'm just gonna keep walking.
Thank you, all of you, and thank you, Mr. Haskett.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you. Doop-a-doop-a-doop.
Thank you, Mr. Haskett. Do you want to say a few words? Thank you to the Madrigals, and now we will continue with our 2012 tax levy hearing. Mr. Albus?
That is so unfair to have to follow them. At the November meeting, the board adopted a tentative levy, and the increase over last year exceeded 5%. So that's the trigger for requiring a truth and taxation hearing, which is what we're having tonight. So I just want to briefly recap the components of this year's levy and why we're having the hearing. On an annual basis, the board is asked to consider or adopt a tax levy. And a tax levy is a request for property taxes to fund the school year that will start next July. While the board can levy or ask for any amount you desire, the amount of revenue actually received is limited by a formula contained in the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act. There are two components to that formula. One is the December year-over-year Consumer Price Index that determines the aggregate increase on existing property. And for this levy, that increase is 3%. And the other one is what is known as the new construction value within the district. Now, this is an unusual year because there is what is known as a tax increment financing district within the boundaries of District 115. And that is expiring this year. It's the Sunset TIF, the McDonald's, the fire station, the Everett area. When that expires, it is treated as new construction. And so we increase our levy to capture that new growth. So because we're over 5%, we had to publish what was called a black box notice in the paper, and that showed an increase of, exclusive of bonds, of about 5.5%. With bonds, I think it was 4.62. That doesn't mean everyone's taxes are going up 4.62%. The aggregate increase on existing property under this formula is 3%. What that means is if all of you represent the town, Mr. Carey's property tax bill could go up 5%, but Mr. Burgener's might be 1%, and so on down the line. So that in the aggregate, it's a 3% increase. So what happens to you individually as homeowners depends on what happens to the value of your property in relationship to all the other properties in the district. Again, the reason we're asking for more money this year is to capture the new construction that's coming onto the TIF. And that's important because I'm going to go back to 2009 when we were in the middle of a contract and the economy had tanked and we were hemorrhaging money, basically. We talked about a path to black, and we said there are 3 components to getting back in the black or getting financially healthy. One was making reductions, which we've done. One was negotiating a contract, or in this case it turned out to be contracts, that were more reflective of the current economy. And the third was capturing the TIF when it expired. So we're on the last leg of that. We balanced last year's budget. The board in September adopted a budget this year that was balanced. We will not have revenues exceed expenditures by the amounts quoted during the strike by any stretch of the imagination. But this is an important action tonight of that path to black strategy that was first laid out several years ago. Again, this was adopted at the November 13th meeting, and we need to file it by the last Tuesday in December. I have some material that I can go through if there are any questions, but other than the fact that the TIF is coming on, it's pretty routine to what we've done in past years. So are there any questions from board members at this time? Yes, sir.
In the past, when you've talked about the TIF coming on, what was the number associated versus the 48.6 that we're actually projecting to get?
Oh, at times it was as high as 65, 70 million. Now, what the difference in revenue is, I would actually have to sit down and calculate, because while the value of the TIF is not what had been projected several years ago, because of the way the formulas work, the tax rate is higher than what we would have projected several years ago as well. So what that true net offset is probably not as much as it might appear from that value going down. Yes, sir.
So, Alan, is it fair to say that if the TIF weren't expiring this year, we wouldn't need to have the open hearing, that the levy would have been below the mandatory 5%?
We would have been in the, I might have added a couple tenths of a percent for new construction, but we would have been in the 3% range. That's correct.
Other questions or comments from board members? All right, at this time I would ask if there were any questions or comments from the audience. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the tax levy hearing.
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the tax levy hearing is adjourned. Thank you. Now I'd like to call to order the meeting of Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, December 4th, 2012. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Snoblin?
Here.
Mr. Edson?
Here.
Mr. Block? Mr. Scribner? Mr. Burgener?
Here.
Mr. Carey?
Here.
Mrs. Golan?
Here, thank you, Ms. Barrett. President's report. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. As you've noticed, we're having a earlier than usual meeting, December 4th, and that's because of winter break coming up. Normally we meet the second Tuesday of the month. As you know, if you can't attend our meetings, they are rebroadcast several times a month on cable television, and also video clips of these meetings can be found on the district website. Our agenda is posted online prior to each meeting, and the minutes are posted after they've been approved, usually the following month. If you have any questions about what goes on at our meetings, you should feel free to call our central office, and either Eileen or Janice will direct you to the appropriate person to talk to answer your questions. Next, just a reminder to our board members that your Open Meetings Act training must be completed by January 1st. And moving on from that, later tonight, under action items on the agenda, we are scheduled to accept the 2012 audit, which was conducted by the firm Miller Cooper and Company. But I'm going to bump up the presentation portion of the segment of that so that our guest speaker can go on to another engagement this evening. Alan, would you like to introduce our guest?
Andy Mace is the managing partner. Thank you. Andy Mace is the managing partner on our account from Miller Cooper, and he is here to, he met with the Finance Committee several weeks ago, but he's here to give an overview to the board and answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, we went over it in pretty thorough detail in Finance Committee, so I won't spend a lot of time going through the details. I'll just hit a couple of highlights. One is, I always like to mention that it's a clean audit opinion. Not all school districts get clean audit opinions. Most are qualified for fixed asset, lack of fixed asset reporting or cash basis reporting or something like that. District 115 is not. There are no surprises in this audit report. As Mr. Albus alluded to, it does demonstrate that you did have a reduction in your expenditures this year, and that aligns with your budget, your financial plan that you laid out to help get in the black, and consequently, you can see on page 16 and 17 if you have it with you, you did generate a little bit of some operating surplus among your funds during the year. Certainly not very large. You're still looking at about a month or less of operating expenditures residing in fund balance. So that's a positive direction that you've moved in. but certainly your fund balances are not high by any means. Additionally, the reduction in expenditures can be evidenced on the last page of the report in your operating costs per pupil and per capita tuition charge. Both of those numbers went down despite the fact that your average daily attendance numbers went down. Usually that drives that number back up, but because you cut costs this year to reduce expenditures, that went down as well. Those are really the highlights of the financial activities during the year. There is a more thorough discussion in the management's discussion and analysis section, beginning on page 3, which I won't get into, but if you read no further than page 3, you would have a good understanding of what happened financially during the year. Operationally, we issued our standard communication letter to the board. In it, we just talk about what occurred. Were there any disagreements with management? Were there any unadjusted audit adjustments or anything like that? There were none. And it's most uncommon where we don't have any adjustments or where we don't have anything to communicate. And as a part of our audit, we do look at internal controls. We look at the significant transaction classes to see that controls exist, for one, whether they've been placed in operation and whether they're operating effectively. And as a part of that, look at controls in order to conduct our audit, we found no discrepancies at all. We look at payroll, accounts payable, the treasury function, revenues, receipts, grants, activity funds. We even look at the P cards and board and educational travel and other types of expense reimbursements. We found controls to be in place and no departures from those controls. So in short, we find this district to have an excellent organizational attitude over controls. You have layers built in, which are very nice, which I think the shared services arrangement here helps you achieve better because you do have multiple levels of control and review, unlike most districts that don't have that. So again, I think it's a very positive report. You have good stewards in your business office and administration of the district's assets, and I think they're doing a great job. Any questions of me?
Mr. Carey?
Andy, maybe you covered this, but is there a management letter being issued identifying any control?
No, that's what I alluded to. There would have been, had we found any control deficiencies, material weaknesses, or even management letter points. There's different levels of required reporting, and none that fell into that, which again is very uncommon.
Great. One of our community members has written calling for the creation of an inspector general. You and I might call it an internal audit type position. How common is that within school districts in the state of Illinois?
Well, other than the city of Chicago, I only know of one other district that has that. That's Carpentersville 300. But no, it's like I said, that's the only one I know. Yeah.
Do you have a view as to whether or not it would be cost-effective or necessary to implement such a role?
Well, you know, as an auditor, I'm always in favor of more control and oversight. But in your case, my opinion would be no, cost-effective wise. Like I said, you have built-in layers, you have established controls that are documented, they're written, they're adhered to. The board plays an important oversight in the district's finances. I don't see it here, personally. You know.
I think Andy's touched on a good point, because having been on your side of the table for a number of years, you can always add more layers of control. You may not get incremental value by it, and you may not be spending the taxpayer, in our case, the taxpayer's dollars well.
That's right.
To add that additional layer. can always choose to do it, but it may, again, not be cost-effective, and that's why the
Yeah,
the
exactly.
phrasing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members?
Just a comment. A couple of weeks ago, I attended an Illinois Association of School Boards pre-conference session on financial management. I was like really reaching outside the box there. And they talked a lot about internal controls, and I realized that I didn't know very much about ours. So I started asking some questions, learned quite a bit more, and it's a tremendous help to hear from you that we do have adequate and appropriate internal controls in place. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and furthermore, you've gone to the step of documenting them, because some of these controls can be very subtle, and you may want to shift some job duties around just for efficiency within the office, but you may be negating a control there. So it's important and good that you do have those documented so that you can refer to that in the case of turnover or consideration of job shifting. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you very much. We don't want to keep you, but thank you very much for
You're
joining
welcome,
us
and I
tonight.
think now I'm going to listen to Christmas music on the way.
Doesn't that sound good?
Yeah, I figured it was, you couldn't top that. So.
No, it sounded great here. I couldn't imagine what it sounded like from your perspective.
Like angels singing, absolutely. Thank you again. Okay, next we have the superintendent's report. That concluded the president's report, by the way, so we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mrs. Golan. I'd like to call on Mr. Hoffman to begin the superintendent's report.
Really not a lot to report on since it's only been about 10 school days since our last board meeting with the holidays and this early meeting. But we did have on the same day as our last board meeting the open house, which went very well. We had about 600 plus parents into our school to follow through the everyday life of their child, follow in their footsteps, go to their classes, have a regular passing period, and talk to their teachers and actually see for themselves how their children and what their children do during the day. So it was great. A lot of great feedback, both from faculty and staff. So we're very happy to have put that back in this year, and we're glad that it's kind of in the review mirror. We are heading towards break. We have 4 straight weeks from Thanksgiving till Christmas break. And those 4 straight weeks, 20 straight school days, a lot of work is being done. Moving fast and furious and heading towards the end of the first semester, which is tough to believe that we're that close. Otherwise, the tone and tenor in the building is great. We have our kids are doing a lot of great work and moved into the winter sports season. We had let Barb Papp send her off to after her 32nd play and final play in the fall, and so we're moving towards some really great stuff in this second quarter. So.
And while I'm setting up for another part of the superintendent's report, Ms. Hoffman, would you mind talking briefly about the significant point of pride that you received the other day from the boosters on the number of our students that are doing really remarkable things after they leave us here?
We have always had a lot of our students go on to play athletics in college, whether it's Division I, II, or III, and our halls are filled with future college athletes. But we really didn't do a great job of honoring those traditions and kind of following those kids through. We kind of would hear word of mouth or their brothers or, from the community we'd hear. And so what our booster club did several years ago was start a board that basically said, where are they now? And they contacted the sports information directors of the schools and had them send pictures of our athletes. And they started small with a little bulletin board. And now what they've done is they've compiled a list and a picture of just about every student athlete that's still in student athletics in college right now. So that's mostly freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and a couple of fifth years who did a red shirt one way or another. They're all in all are over 80. We know we haven't gotten them all, but it's a wonderful display with their picture, their school, and their sport. And if you go through them, all of us have been involved in high school have touched some of those lives and are very proud of those kids. It's every type of school you can imagine: Northwestern, Stanford, Loras, Holy Cross, etc. and every sport you could think of. It shows, it's testament to the hard work our kids do and the programs that we have, the opportunities we give them, the ability that we have to let them follow their passions. And we're really proud of them, and now we're able to kind of celebrate with them as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. It was really gratifying to go down through the list and a number of the students that you recognize by name, and some of those playing in national championships in a variety of sports. Okay. All right, so let me introduce the music you just heard just a minute ago. All right, as the board knows, and some of our community members may know, I spent a better part of a week and a half in China in the last couple weeks, and with Joe Moline, who does HR for District 67, and Carolyn Crummis, and Michelle Dr. Shin, who's principal. Carolyn Crummis is a remarkable photographer, and it's one of the things that was a very pleasant surprise on the trip. And the photographs that you see were all taken by Carolyn. She put this presentation together. And so there are a number of images from the trip. I'll narrate those briefly with a little sound accompaniment here, and then talk about some of the takeaways and how it applies to our students in the high school district as well. And this is from the Great Wall of China, we visited briefly. And the bottom is very steep. This is from an elementary district, the morning exercises. And this is from a Buddhist temple. Buddha. Happy Buddha. There are a variety of Buddhas. And this is from the high school. They're doing their eye exercises that they do each day. This is outside the Buddhist temple. They burn incense. We were greeted by a high school band. I had prejudice they were not as good as the Madrigals. They were good, but not as good as the Madrigals. This is one of the monks from the temple. And this is the wife of the bicycle repairman who had a shop on a little corner of a street. And there sits a man working with his cell phone outside a cart, and behind him is a luxury hotel going up. This is inside a biology classroom. This is a grandmother picking up the grandkids from preschool. And this is on an elementary recess. And I was the group leader for our contingent of 45 people, and this is the summit. So what did we see? I hope I can stop this here. I think it stops like that. So what did we see? One of the things that was really astonishing is the fact that the kids the world over, kids are kids. And you hear stories about what Chinese schools are like, and then you go in there and what you discover is they are bubbly and curious and goofy and silly and engaging just like our kids are. The importance of relationships really can't be overstated. One of the critical things in doing anything with the Chinese is they don't do any sort of business with anybody that they don't have a very close relationship with. So you build friendships first, and then, and only then, do you do business. So it's this notion that we have of sending out RFPs to do business. That's not how they do business there. They do it with people that they know and that they trust. A huge number of contrasts on the visit. The first world and third world live cheek by jowl. The gentleman out in front of the luxury hotel going up, working on a cell phone, clearly in some little metal smithing cart that he's got there, and it's everywhere. The role of government in their schools, in their economy, they are a very capitalistic country. The Chinese are very eagerly capitalistic, but they're also in a very, very controlled economy as well. Very interestingly, in terms of their schools are decentralizing to a significant degree, trying to send as much autonomy to lower levels as they deem prudent. And the contrast of that to our school, and this is one of the things that I spoke on at the summit, is that our schools are centralizing to a greater extent than in any point in the history of our nation. So the Common Core is, without any question, the largest single change to American schooling certainly in our lifetime, but probably at any point in American education. They have a crazy contrast of history and then modern life right next to it. So China is critically important. Is one of the things. I'm reading a book about the investment that the Chinese have in building new airports alone. The book is from James Fallows, noted author, and one of the astonishing statistics that he uses in that book is that nearly 100% of the growth of the aviation industry alone will be in Asia, and the lion's share of that will be in China. The Chinese are investing $250 billion in airport construction alone. That's just looking at airports. Now, to put that in an American context, that is 2 years of what we spent in Afghanistan. So all the money that we have spent in just that one action in Afghanistan, they're investing that in an infrastructure that is going to be on a scale similar to the Eisenhower freeway system or the Transcontinental Railway, and have that kind of an effect. And you'll see a video of that later on. They are emerging and developing and doing so very eagerly. The trip that we went on is paid in large part by the Chinese government. They are investing huge amounts in trying to internationalize their schools and also their universities. There are 4 times as many students studying in Chinese universities today than there were just 4 years ago. So in the span of 4 years, we have 4 times as many American kids studying at Peking University and other places around China. China sees the value of American education. They are very fascinated by American ingenuity. Now, as you saw their morning exercise, they've got a real challenge to shift from an incredibly compliant society that values our ingenuity. And how are they going to do that? That's one of many struggles that they're going to have. So, education is the key to their success. They see this. They're investing in education to an incredible extent. The children show up, they're happy, and they are very hardworking. One of the very interesting things that they talked about as part of one of their presentations was the whole child, balancing the whole child. And we hear about how hard Chinese kids work. And one of the principals was posed a question, so how do you teach to the whole child? And the answer was, well, in China, hard work is synonymous with being happy. And so we don't know how to measure that. And so we fished around with that answer a little bit. But very industrious, and the entire extended family pours its life into their one child that they get. So you can imagine every family that is represented in this room or other places in our community, if they each had just one child, the amount of attention and focus that goes into making sure that child is happy, healthy, and productive is really, really great. So this video is, so what this video is here, this is in a room with a TV screen about as big as this entire wall right here, in a room that is about 3 times the size of this room. And what it's showing is the plan for the city of Shenzhen, where we visited. So this entire thing shows some of what is and a lot of what will be. The building in which this model is housed is about 3 times the size of this building. So they've got this giant train set, essentially. And they say, this is a little bit of what we've got now, and it's the plan for what we're going to do in the future. And the plan for that city is 4 bullet trains that will take you from Shenzhen to Beijing, which would take you 2.5 to 5 hours on a bus or a car. And it'll get you from point to point in 33 minutes. And those bullet trains are going to go all over China. And that is the rail investment. The airline investment, that's a different investment. And one of the things that this body perhaps can appreciate is they don't have to hold one public hearing on any of this. And so when they say we're going to do it and their economy is now expected to grow at a rate of 8%, they are going to execute it. And it is going to be amazing. And so that video that you saw, that is the plan for the future. 5 universities. It's already the largest port city. The container ports of China, Shenzhen is the #1 container port in the nation. So all the stuff that comes from any container that arrives on our shores is likely to go through Shenzhen. 30 years ago, it was a city of 700,000. Today, it's roughly 6 million, with about 13 million that live total within larger metropolitan Shenzhen. So what does this mean for our students? The Chinese are aggressively, eagerly looking to create partnerships. One of the things that we learned on the trip was that we can have summer camps that are hosted within our buildings here, largely paid for by the Chinese government. So they're spending money to advance the teaching of Mandarin language and also the Chinese culture. That our students are going to have an opportunity, if they so choose, to supply the largest middle class in the entire world, the largest growing middle class in the entire world with goods and services. So all of that plan that we saw, that huge train table, someone is going to build it and supply all the stuff that those families are going to purchase and utilize. And that can be our children, or it can be someone else's children. But what this means for us is that we have an opportunity to be a part of, without any question, the fastest growing portion of the world's economy. And do we have an obligation to do that for our children? I would say absolutely we do, because when you look at the growth areas for numerous industries, many of those are going to be somewhere in Asia in the next 25 to 50 years. So what this means for us, we can look forward. And frankly, I have to tell you, I am not a huge fan of traveling to China. I don't like to fly on planes. I don't sleep and all those other things. I'm miserable. The air is terrible. You can't drink the water. It is a significant part of our children's future. And because of that, we should be looking at it very, very seriously and trying to get our thumb on the scale for our kids. Because whether we like it or not, much like the Kindle is the future of reading, and we don't have to like the Kindle. We might like the tactile feel of a newspaper. Our kids won't know the difference. And China is very much like that in a whole variety of ways for our children. Their future is going to be very bright if they choose to participate in what's going on in Asia. So with that, that will end the superintendent's report. Happy to field any questions, but thank you for the opportunity.
Mike, I have just a couple of questions. I know that we have a robust Mandarin program at the high school, but I'm not sure everybody knows what's on the horizon, what's bubbling up to the high school. Could you just spend a moment or two talking about the Mandarin immersion program at District 67, because it was District 67 administrators that you traveled with?
It's a very good question. And the District 67 has, they are now in the 3rd year of their Mandarin immersion program. There's a program where students spend 50% of their day in class with a Mandarin teacher and 50% of their class in English. And 2 teachers then trade. They swap kids halfway through the day. One of the interesting things from the program is that there's a survey of parents about that program, and it's a 7-point Likert scale, 6 and 7 being either really happy or incredibly happy. And Dr. Hendrickson said he'd never seen a survey with more 6s and 7s on it of any kind on a parent satisfaction survey. So these students are moving their way up through the curriculum. A couple years they'll be in middle school, and we're planning the future of what middle school Mandarin instruction will look like as well. We have Mandarin there, but trying to extend the teaching of a core subject in Mandarin at our Deer Path Middle School. One of the very interesting things, there's an old joke about what do you call somebody that speaks 3 languages? They're trilingual in 2 languages. They're bilingual in 1 language. They're an American. And many students around the world have some part of their day taught in a core subject area in a different language. Dutch kids, German kids. The Chinese kids' English is remarkably good. And certainly our kids want to be, we want to see our students have that sort of cultural and linguistic fluency that other students around the world have.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, thank you very much. Next on the agenda is public participation. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board at this time? Seeing no one, we will move on to our reports. Yes.
Hi.
If you would give your name and address.
Robert Mormon, Lake Forest. I know you're going to be approving the, the audit and the tax levy for 2012, 2013. I know under Mr. Simek, you sound very well spoken, and I know in the past Harry Griffith didn't do a lot of speaking. He had a public relations firm handle his speaking for him, and I really question why we pay almost $250,000 or $200,000 to have a PR person whose main job it was just to do fluff articles for Harry, or I should say Dr. Griffith. I don't mean to slight him. But I really do think with the one high school district between Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Simek, I don't know why we have to have someone speak for them. I mean, it's a small community. I'd like to hear from you, and I don't see why we need to hear from other people, especially the person who's the second highest paid person in the district. And even though it's an outside firm technically, but for all practical purposes, Ms. Whipple, you are a school employee. I mean, you have a school office, you have a school phone, you have all the school email, you have all the makings of a regular employee, and nothing against you personally, but I think if we're going to have the district engage the community more closely, I think we need to get rid of some layers, and one perfect way is, I don't think we need a mouthpiece for you. I just heard you up here, you're very well spoken. I'd rather hear from you. And basically, and so when you are looking at approving a new contract, and I know there was talk about a 6-month contract while you look at it. So is there something, am I interrupting something?
No, we're just.
Okay, well anyway, that's, I just really think public relations doesn't really serve our kids. We just had a recent strike. The money would be better off going to teachers, and if we're looking at reallocating expenses, I just think On the administrative side, there's a lot of places you can cut, and I really think having a, PR person is a really an unnecessary expense.
Thank you, Mr. Mormon. Mr.
welcome.
Simic, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. And Mr. Mormon, we don't answer questions as part of public participation. However, I'd be happy to call you after the meeting. We are going to talk about some of the things that you were addressing in your public comment, and I'd be happy to follow up with you personally later on this week if this doesn't satisfy your curiosity about those things. Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope you do stay for the rest of the presentation. Is there anyone else here who would like to address the board? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to our report for the evening, which is the annual assessment report. We have Mr. Benson from the high school.
Oh, thank you, and good evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to give the assessment report every year. It's always a pleasure to talk about the achievement of Lake Forest High School students. I've done this for a number of years now, and it always seems to get better and better. Tonight, we intend to review the national and state exams that were important for our kids. We're going to discuss a little bit about comparisons to other schools. And then finally, we're going to end up with some changes in local assessment and how teachers are working together to improve instruction and to improve learning. So let's start with the ACT exam. It's probably the most important exam in a student's career in terms of the national and state exams. It's involved with the application process to colleges, and it really affects the acceptance to a college for any student. The students take it very seriously, and they work hard to do well on it. It consists of 4 subject area exams. Each exam is graded with a whole number from 1 to 36, along with a composite score, which is really the rounding of the 4 subject areas rounded to the nearest whole number. There's also a writing component that's optional. It's normally not included in our discussion because it's not part of the composite score. But we will talk about it a little bit later. Looking at our results, this is a graph that shows the ACT scores, average score of our students for the past 10 years. And again, we can celebrate. We had the highest, or the class of 2012 had the highest ACT score average again. And we're all very proud of that, but it's not, as I say every year, it's not what we should get out of this graph. What you should get out of the graph is the trend line. It should always look like you're moving upward, because there's going to be some times when you might go down 1/10 or 2/10 or 3/10. And that's okay. But you want to make certain that the trend line over time is high. So when you look at these graphs, please look at the trend line. If we compare ourselves with the state, well, we certainly expect to be better than the state, and we know we're going to be better than the state, but the reason that we include the graph is to show the state is improving slightly every year. Lake Forest High School is improving, but we're improving at a much faster rate. I mean, if you look at the last few years, it's really been incredible what we've done. For the individual scores, I used to have graphs for this, but I decided to do it differently this year. The average student at Lake Forest High School had a 27.2 ACT score for English. All right, that probably doesn't have a lot of meaning to you. But when you convert that to a national percentile, that tells us that the average English grade is in the 85th to the 88th percentile. It's in that band. That's a tremendously high band for the average student in high school. And you look at all the subjects. I mean, they're all real high there. And I'll point out math, that's my area, you know that. The national percentile for the average student is the 88th to the 91st percentile. That's remarkable. If you go down to the optional writing test, well, it shows that the score is 8.2. That's because the writing test is really graded 1 to 12. It's always a whole number, 1 to 12. That's the 86th to the 94th percentile for the average. Tremendous scores. We should be very proud of our students, our teachers, and also be proud of our feeder schools, because we couldn't do this unless we got good students from the feeder schools. It's tremendous. And well, as we should be thanking our parents, because without the support of parents, kids won't do this. Before we talk about comparing ourselves to other schools, let's talk about and review the difference between an open enrollment school and a selective enrollment school. I do this every year, but I want to make certain we all know the difference. Lake Forest High School is an open enrollment school. We accept everybody who's in the district. There are other high schools that are selective enrollment. They'll base their admission on things like scores on standardized exams, specialized entrance exams, previous grades, teachers' recommendations, whatever. You would expect those schools to be very high because they're choosing the cream of the crop. And I might add, most of them are. But when we look at the rankings in the Tribune or the Sun-Times, they don't necessarily mention that. For the top AC performance in the state, our Northside College Prep did it again. It's been the top school for many years in a row. But if you look at this chart, you'll see the schools listed in red are selective enrollment schools. If you just focus on the schools written in black, you'll see that we're really tied for a second place in terms of our ACT performance. Now, please don't associate ACT performance with the greatest school around, because ACT just measures a few subjects, and we all know our school and other schools are much more than that. We have sports, we have arts, we have other subjects completely. There's much, much more to a school than that. But we can say that that's how we rank on the ACT exam. Every high school class that graduates from our school has 3 major metrics sent to us by ACT. All right, during the sophomore year, at the beginning of the sophomore year in October, all of our students will take the PLAN exam. The PLAN is a pre-ACT exam. It is, it covers the same 4 subjects. It has a composite score, and it's graded from 1 to 32 instead of 1 to 36. Okay, at the end of the junior year, our students take the Prairie State, and the first day of the Prairie State exam is an ACT exam. And then the ACT Corporation then mails us a document that shows exactly how our students did at the end of the junior year. And after they graduate, we will get what's known as the final ACT class average, and that score is based on the last ACT test that every student takes. Now, some students will only take 1 ACT test, but many students will take more than 1, and this average is based on the last test, not the average of all of them, not the best one, but the last test that they take. And what you have here are 5 years of history plus the class of 2013. And you'll notice I've always in the past made a prediction. And last year, I made a prediction that said, we'll probably go down on our ACT. If you remember, about this time last year, I said that. And the class really surprised us. And I made my prediction based on the plan exam and the junior year Prairie State ACT exam. And I suppose we could understand that even mathematically if we hadn't been doing something special. But the last few years, we have been looking at students who didn't score too well on the plan exam, and we identified students in math and reading who scored low, and we've been giving them some targeted interventions. And whether it's just mathematical happenstance that our ACT score turned out to be the highest, or if it really worked, well, we'll find out over the next few years because we're doing the same thing now. So I'm not making a prediction for the class of 2013. We're just going to have to see what happens there. But we're doing the targeted interventions, and again, it's in math and reading, and we'll see how it goes. The College Board sponsored courses for the advanced placement exams are very important for our kids too, because that saves them a lot of money in college. And for a school of our size, we're offering last year we offered 25 different AP exams, and actually 27 if you count all the versions of art. And it's really remarkable for a school of our size. I mean, if you have a school of 5,000 or 3,000 or more, like let's say New Trier or Stevenson, it's easy to have that number. But our size of school, that's really remarkable. Our kids do a great job on it too. Look at the trend line. That's the important part for this graph. What this graph shows is the number of passing AP exams we've had for each of the last 10 years. And for 2012, we had the second highest that we've ever had. If you look at the, I don't know if you can see it, the number in red there, or I'm sorry, the number in blue is our school enrollment for each of the years. For 2012, that was the lowest enrollment we've had in a 10-year period, but we still had the second highest number of AP exams, which is wonderful. And this next chart shows the percentage of AP exams that have passed. Now, AP exams are graded 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. College Board will tell you that a 5 is considered an A B would be the 4, and a 3 would be a C, and so on. But last year, we had 94% of our kids score 3, 4, or 5. That's an extremely high percentage. Matter of fact, from checking in the area for 50 schools, that was about the second highest. It's really a tremendous achievement to have that happen. We'll get to the Prairie State exam. This is the exam that's used for No Child Left Behind purposes in Illinois. It consists of exams that are given on 2 days. First day is the ACT, like I said. The second day for math and reading is a work keys exam. Work keys is an exam written by the ACT, and it's designed to measure the readiness to work right after you graduate from high school. It's something that the business community had insisted that Illinois put in its testing program. Science doesn't have a work keys exam, so the state writes its own exam for that. Writing was eliminated the year before, so we didn't test it in 2012. There's just 3 subjects: math, reading, and science. For No Child Left Behind, we only really need 2. If you look at the results over the last 10 years, this graph shows the percent of students who either meet or exceed state standards. And we're consistently over 80% every year, while the average in the state's a little over 50%. That's really very high when you compare it to the other schools in the state, and knowing what those exams measure, it's really a tremendous score. Individually, for reading, math, and science, they're all about the same. Math and science, a hair higher than reading, but we all do remarkably well on the standards. Now, for ranking. I put this in here because the Tribune and the Sun-Times both rank. They both use the Prairie State for their ranking. They use it in different ways. The Tribune looks at it like I did in the graphs, where the percent of students that meet or exceed, whereas the Sun-Times looks at the average grade on the test. Usually they're pretty close to each other for the ranking, but sometimes there's a slight difference just because they're using the test differently. We believe the ACT score is the one that should be the important one because that's the test that's important to our kids. That's what's used by colleges for the acceptance process. That's the ones that our kids will work on and not in any way try to not do well on. If you look at the ranking, I'll just talk about open enrollment schools. If we use the ACT, we would come in second place there with the Tribune and the Sun-Times. Using the Prairie State, it would be 7th. I'm not going to dwell on this as long as I did before, but you know the difference is going to be that second day. But I'm very pleased to say that our efforts have helped on the second day. It has improved our second day scores. If you'll remember, for the previous few years, we've had kids score very, very high on the ACT and then get 0 on the second day. That did not happen last fall. We didn't have a single person score real high and then a 0. We had some that scored real high and then not so good, but we didn't get 0 on it. All right, something that I really wanted to bring up the last year or so, but I didn't think I had time, I'm going to do now. Talk about how our departments are starting to use common assessments a little bit more. Now, when I say common assessment, I mean that every student taking the same course, regardless of the teacher, will take the same exam or possibly same assignments, same lab experiments, whatever. Teachers are getting together to plan the instruction. It's not an individual island like it was when I was teaching. All right? Well, that's not quite true for math, and I'll bring that up later. But teachers can still teach the subject any way they want, but they agree to what's going to be tested or what's going to be assigned. And then you're going to have clearly defined criteria or rubrics for the grading, if it's not something like multiple choice. All right, if it's an open-ended question, that's kind of important that you all grade it the same way. All right, the departments that now use common assessments in some way will be all of our core departments plus art and then driver education. I'd like to talk about 2 examples. I could really do it for all the subjects, but let me do it for math naturally, and then English. For math, there's a common final exam for all courses. Now, I'd like to point out that that has been the case for the 40 years that I've been here. That part hasn't changed. It used to be, though, math was the only one that did that. But they're doing more now. Now, for the freshman courses, they're having common chapter exams, and the teachers meet to plan their instruction. They meet together as a team to write the tests. And then they meet on how to grade it. For example, if it's a geometry proof, you want to make certain that you're grading them the same way. And then afterward, they meet to discuss the results, make appropriate adjustments, and ask, is there anything we have to do over again or for next year that we should change? It's improving instruction, which is going to improve learning. An English department goes one up on that. They're going to give a common final for the freshman through junior classes. That's a writing exam. And the essays, which are open-ended questions. I mean, you could have two teachers conceivably grade an essay differently, but they make certain that they write a very good rubric, and then every final is scored by two teachers, and if the grade comes out different, it's graded by a third teacher, and they'll discuss why were we different. So it's a learning situation, and the idea is to make certain that everyone who takes the same course gets the same experience. Well, experience is the wrong word, but at least same assessments. Highlights. Class of 2012 had our all-time highest average composite score. I wrote that wrong. I should have said the trend line is moving up. And for the AP, our second highest number of exams given, and we have a very high percentage of passing scores. Again, I should have said the trend line is going up. And for the Prairie State, very high percentage of students continue to meet or exceed state standards. But we're going to continue to work on that second day and doing even a better job than we did the past year, although I'm very proud of what happened the last year. Any questions?
Board members, questions on the presentation? I know you read a lot in your packet. Nicki?
Am I remembering correctly that we only have about either 1 or 2 more years of the Prairie State because of the Common Core standards coming in? Is that correct?
Yeah, the exam is going to change significantly. This spring, it'll be the same. Next year, we're not sure. But the year after that, it's going to be, what's the acronym for that?
The PARC.
The PARC exam, right. It'll be completely different. I don't even think we can look at graphs for 10 years worth of data once that starts.
Thor, if you wouldn't mind, go through what you anticipate being the result of that, the change of that Prairie State test, because there's a significant amount of conversation about what parents will be seeing in terms of the relative scores after the PARC exams come out.
You know, I'm not certain what to expect there. It's going to be different. I mean, it's not going to involve the ACT exam at all. I don't know if we have so many states using the PARC, if colleges will look at that. So it'll remain a test that's important to kids. I mean, that would be real nice if that could happen. I think there's a lot of unknowns. I really not certain how to answer that. But somebody does.
Well, no, I don't have the answers, but you know, Thor and I work together on this, of course, and there will be a change next year that would be interesting on day 2. They're actually going to add another work keys assessment, and what will happen with the trio of assessments is that students will actually gain a certification of sorts from day 2 that they can then provide to their colleges and or their future employers. So it may change our result on day 2, or students may not like that at all. They have another test on that day. So that's a really new development that will occur. Another potential development that could hit us right away next year. Some days we hear it's happening, some days we hear we're not sure, and that's to add a third assessment at the high school level that's called the Explorer test. It might be required in the state of Illinois. It's in that ACT family. It's typically now given in either 8th grade or 9th grade. Some schools look at a growth model. Some of the things that Thor showed, there are predicted differences between a plan test and an AC test, and we actually examine those as well. We don't put them up on our charts, but there is a predicted average, and we always exceeded that predicted average too. We're right now working on a model where we're trying to exceed our own predicted average on those tests through some of those intervention efforts that Thor mentioned. So a lot going on in this area. The PARC assessment probably won't be a one-time standalone. There will be, formative assessments that roll up into that. We believe it'll be a computer test. So many changes, and as one of the things Thor said, as far as a track record as to what will happen, it'll take us many years to even get a baseline to know where we stand. There's very few states that have moved in this direction in assessing the Common Core to date. The ones that have, they do see a drop in their scores. One thing I heard, even just today, is that ACT is actually not sitting at the table with Park, which is kind of interesting. Instead, they're furiously developing their own system, and we hear that they're potentially waiting in the wings to see this one fail so that they can step up and say, hey, we've got something. Don't know if that's true or not, but they are looking at assessments that'll go further down into the younger grades through that ACT family. So a lot of interesting things in the world of assessment that the high school will continue to grapple with.
So initially, do we anticipate that the Park will not encompass the ACT, and students then presumably will be taking the ACT on their own?
I believe that to be true, and now, and the whole thing could fall apart because we've got a predicted date. They could, for instance, there are some items on it, like that artificial intelligence will be needed to score it. Long reading samples that'll have to be judged by a computer, and will those things even fall apart? Will they actually be able to do that? So there's a lot of serious question marks, and in which case would they continue to use the ACT as a filler until those things are ready? But right now it does look that like our students would do that ACT if indeed they want it. Park is trying to partnership with higher ed to make to have them look at that test, and they clearly know the importance of that, because if the colleges aren't going to consider it, they know the students won't be very invested in it.
So they would like colleges to accept the Park in addition or instead of the ACT?
Any of that, and there's even some conversation that perhaps schools would give a grade on the Park exam and students would then therefore care about it. So very, very evolving world in this area.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, board members? Okay, Mr. Benson, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Cooley, as well. Next, we have our board committee reports. Board Education Committee, Nicki.
We have not met since our last board meeting, and the next date we have on the calendar is Wednesday, February 6th.
Thank you. Board Finance and Operations, Jim Carey.
The Joint Committee met on November 14th. As mentioned before, we spent some time talking with the external auditor and went into more depth than we did tonight in terms of the results of the audit work, but as Andy Mace said, it was all very, very positive. The primary purpose of the meeting was to go through an extensive list of capital projects to try to put some priority order on those projects. And I think after lengthy conversation, Alan and team were asked to come back with some additional input on some of those projects and some better estimates. But we also thought it would be important to get the sense of the full board as to how they feel about some of these projects. One of the larger ones on there is the track replacement project. We talked about it in the course of multiple meetings last year around the booster program that was underway. Now that that's not occurring, we need to see where that project fits. Is it something we do next summer or years after? Because we did learn an awful lot more about the current state of the track and what some people thought was a greater need to replace it sooner. So between now and the 18th of this month, which is our next meeting, the full board will have circulated to it some documents, including a summary of the projects, to try to get the sense of all the other members of the board as to where they stand on a number of these projects. The third segment of the project was a meeting with a representative from William Blair. Liz Hennessy, who has met with this board on several occasions, came in to talk to us about opportunities to finance some of our capital projects. Given the fact that these are projects we're going to need to undertake at some point in time, and the current low interest rate environment, it's pretty favorable towards financing work that needs to be done. So we think that we will want to do something, but that's second. The first thing is what's the work we want to do, then we'll figure out how to finance it. But we continue to carry a AAA credit rating. Again, a very accommodative market, so once we determine what we want to do, we ought to be able to carry forward on that. As I said, our next meeting is the 18th of December. These meetings are open, so if there's anybody from the community who would like to come and get more in-depth knowledge of what the committee does, because a lot of our work is really done there as opposed to bantering it about here. You know, we're spending an hour or 2 hours on these at these meetings, so the public is welcome to come and see how we tackle some of these things and the amount of debate and rigor that's associated with those discussions. Thank you.
And that meeting's at 7:30 a.m. over at this campus, correct? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carey. We have no liaison reports, although at any time if board members feel that they have a report they want to give either about Foundation, IASB, EdRed, or NSSED, please let me know. Moving on, we have our action items. The first is the approval of the Whipple Consulting contract. Mr. Simic?
Thank you, Mrs. Golan, and I will introduce this, and Mr. Albus will follow up with some detail on this. And by way of introduction, what is before the board is to grant a 3-year contract that will coincide with a contract that District 67 recently approved in its board meeting last Tuesday. The purpose of this is that the work will extend throughout the next 3 years, including projects that are not limited to, but include complete revamping of the district website. Our district website is woefully outdated. Somebody recently said that our website looks like it's 10 years old and was made for $5,000, when in fact it is 12 years old and was made for $2,500. We also have a great need for a paper newsletter throughout the district. When you look at the number of families that do not have a child in our high schools, it's it depends on which number you want to listen to, but the last number I heard was 93% of our community does not have a child attending our high school. And what that means, and I heard this loud and clear from our business community in particular in my last life, was that they miss hearing from us. And our community here is no different. That need to hear what's going on in the schools, to find out where how well their students are doing. The report from Mr. Benson tonight would be music to everyone's ears in our non-parent community without any question. So the website, paper newsletter, the expansion of our outreach to social media in particular. We do not currently have a Facebook presence. And in particular, one of the things that has come through loud and clear in all of my conversations with people around our community is that there's a great deal of interest in engaging the community in a variety of ways, and face-to-face contact and so forth. Some of the things that Mrs. Whipple does that go unnoticed, very similar to what the superintendent's best work. Much of that work is never seen by the public, and that could not be more true than for Mrs. Whipple's work in our community, especially with our APT parents, mostly moms, but the occasional dad as well. Call her innumerable times, morning, noon, night, frequently on the weekends, to find out what is going on, what's happening in the district. Ask her opinion. She is a very, very trusted source of information by them. And everywhere that this is not my first rodeo, and everywhere I've ever been, the statement comes up that you could always do better in communication. And communication is an investment. And it's investment in people's confidence, and it's an investment in people's knowledge of what is going on in the district. And good communication is not spin, it is information, and it's also selected information, trying to determine what is of most interest and what is of most value. You must have professionals in those positions. We have a number of things that we saw recently this year. Was that Mrs. Whipple's media contacts are built over a lifetime of service in this industry and go very, very easily unnoticed and taken for granted at times. And we saw that on a number of occasions this year, whether it was the tragedies that we had with our students not very long ago, or with the recent situation with our high school contract negotiations. And these are, frankly, not things that I have the time or the skill or the energy, many of these, to do. And we must invest in somebody that is a professional in this. And so Mr. Albus will give a little bit of detail about what these numbers look like that are before the board tonight.
I'm going to tag team a little bit with Mrs. Hermes. I'll start out and talk about the structure of the contract. That came from our law firm, Franzik Radelet. We went through several iterations with Ann and her attorney, and then also had it reviewed again at times by Brian Crowley with Franzik Radelet, and also with Mike McHugh, who is part of our insurance co-op. And so that's why some of the language about FOIA disclosure and insurance requirements got built into the template. I've heard a lot recently about costs of Ann's contract in the district, and we'd like to, I think, just put that in perspective of what that truly means here. And Jennifer has some comparative data. We will use a disclaimer right up front. It is very difficult to benchmark this position. And as Mike said, I've had other rodeos as well, too. What Ann brings to the district and the role she plays here, I don't know another communications person in another district that wears or takes on as much responsibility.
Okay, I wonder why I never get invited to this rodeo that you all seem to be attending. But basically, I was tasked with, or charged with the task of trying to gather comparative data. And like Mr. Albus alluded to, it's very difficult. Districts vary greatly, both in their approach to how they handle their communications, how they handle the responsibilities associated. That may be the things that Mr. Simic referred to, their community engagement, their parent liaisons. Do they split this among several people? Is it someone that just pushes information from a department up onto the web, or is it someone that's actively engaging? Varies very much so among all the districts that we compare to. Several employ these positions as employees. Several may have them as consultants. So once I was able to try to ascertain, did they have an employee, did they have a contractor, did they have a consultant, that was pretty easy. Getting information, though, for these, once you even have that information, is difficult. Most of these positions, if they are employees, are IMRF employees, Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund employees, non-certified positions. Unlike certified positions, TRS positions, there are no easily accessible databases. Everyone knows you can go online and you can search pretty much any certified person's compensation. It's pretty easy to find. Try to find it for an IMRF employee. Virtually impossible. So what I did is I really tried to make contact. This is 2011 data. Make contact with districts that were willing to share this information, and then trying to drill down a little bit about what it includes. Things, again, were all over the map. But what I was able to put up here in front of you tonight is an annual cost with board-paid pension. IMRF employees, of course, like I said, do have a pension contribution required by the board in addition to Social Security and Medicare. Typically, it varies by district, but it could be in the range of maybe 10 to 13% is fairly common. What this does not include for districts that have this listed as employee is the cost of health, dental, life, ADD, those type of things, professional development, other things that you would commonly associate with an employee. I did not include it because, of course, it would vary greatly by district from what insurance plan the employee had selected, whether it was single, whether it was family. So only includes annual salary and pension retirement. When you look at the districts that just have, that utilize consultants, that's an all-in cost. So, for example, you see the 115 number, that's it. There is no health insurance on top of that. There is nothing else that would be associated with the districts that utilize an employee.
We've had some questions as to what this would mean if we were to reverse engineer, and Thor could probably give me a better term for how you would reverse the math. But to determine if we were to spend that money, and this was associated with a position, what would that be? What would the annual salary of that employee be to come to an end result of the 115 number? Now, of course, that does depend on what health insurance they would take and you know, variables as far as their age related to life insurance. So there is some variability. But generally speaking, if they had a standard administrative insurance contract, that would be the equivalent of anywhere from a $54,000 to $56,000 employee if this person was employed directly on our employee books. I've also received some questions about what this means if you looked at it as a community. I don't have all the feeders on here. Like I said, this information is extremely hard to get. But for example, if you did look at New Trier 203, they have an employee, 12-month employee. Like I said, 2011 data, who's an IMRF. They've been in that position for 2 years. And you could also look at their feeder elementary district, Wilmette 39, is also feeds to New Trier. So if you wanted to look at that community, you could do so. That person has 4 years experience. You could do the same thing, you know, when NECA feeds into New Trier. I don't have any of the Stevenson feeders, but we could do the same type of analysis if we wanted to look, let's say, at Stevenson and, you know, Kildare 96 or Stevenson, and I might have Lincolnshire on there. So that question has been raised as well. So if you wanted to take a look at them jointly, you could do so. I also received feedback when I was talking to these other districts about what works for them and what doesn't. You'll notice at the time that I did this, North Shore 113, so that's Deerfield Highland Park High School, had eliminated the position. And for 2011, they did not have a dedicated PR person. So of course I didn't talk to that person, but I talked to others on their administrative staff, which anecdotally just said, this doesn't work. This really doesn't work, because then everybody else is really trying to pick up the slack. So Mr. Hoffman would be doing it, and Mr. Simic would be doing, and everyone would be trying to basically accomplish the same task. So I'm not sure if they're headed in that same direction, or if I think they have done something since. Happy to answer any questions in regards to the data. I'm thankful for the disclaimer, because this is not easy data to gather, but tried to do the best we could with the information available.
Any questions, board members, of Ms. Hermes?
Not to get too caught up in the weeds here, but an employee of one of these other districts is having an employer pay part of their Social Security?
It's the matching, the 6.2% for Social Security, the 145 for Medicare, and there's a mandatory IMRF contribution where there is not to TRS. It's based on your actual history. So yeah. I know I did some work on 67 earlier today, and I can tell you their number is 11.88%, mandatory contribution to IMRF.
On top of Social Security?
On top of Social Security. It's raising to 15% next year.
Okay, so let's call it 18% between those two factors.
I use 20 as a nice round number.
There you go. It's easier. Now I can handle it. Okay, so you got a 20% differential there that a district like 115 would pay on behalf of a given employee. We do not pay that 20% on behalf of a contractor.
Correct. That is the
in
all-in.
point of fact, the contractor absorbs it.
Sure. They have to pay their share and the employer's share.
And I think that's where it gets confusing to an outsider who's not used to looking at what a self-employed individual, what the difference is between $1 to one of them is versus $1 to an employee. And if any of you make the conversion, be careful if you price out your work, because there are a lot of expenses you absorb and do have to pay for to the government and to others when you're self-employed that you don't when you've got your employer covering it. So, not to get too lost in it, but there's a lot of difference there.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else?
I'd like to make a comment. It's not a question for Jen to answer, but it's a little more along the lines of what Mike was talking about. Earlier in this meeting, we heard this position referred to as a PR position, and I think for a lot of people, PR kind of has a negative connotation. It seems to imply spin. That's not what Ms. Whipple's job here is at all. She is a communications professional. That's both a very specific field, and it's a very broad field because it covers many different aspects of communication. She's done board trainings with us to help us understand how to communicate better with the public. She's helped us to see how we can be more transparent and open, how we can communicate clearly to the public so that people do understand what we're doing. It's, you know, PR almost kind of implies that you are hiding something, whereas the purpose of having Ms. Whipple here is to enable us to make everything as open as possible and to frame things for the public and so that they have the information that they have the right to in a form that they can understand and they have the context for. It's an extremely critical position, and especially now that we are talking about a comprehensive communications program that we need to undertake. It's long overdue. Many, many years ago, I was on a communications committee for the high school. I think this had to have been as long as 10 or 12 years ago, and we were wrestling with a lot of the same things at the time. You know, we needed a print newsletter. Was it worth the money? Who did we send it to? And at that time, gosh, I suppose that was probably when the website was new, but these same questions keep coming up if you don't address them in a systematic way, and that's what this contract is attempting to do. We'll have 3 years of working on an organized approach to all of our communications, and it's only going to do good for the community as a whole, in my opinion.
Thank you, Nicki. Anyone else? I do recall the last time the high school did a strategic plan, and that's been many, many years. There was not a communications director, and that became one of the goals of the high school, was to have a good communications department. People want to know what's going on, and most recently they want more transparency, but I don't think you can have that without a communication vehicle. So I think that this is broad, this is wide, and I appreciate certainly all that Whipple Consulting does for me. Just in terms of hours, I think we met on the front lawn at 5:30 a.m. during the strike, and I left at 2 a.m., and you continued on, Mrs. Whipple, because you were there to respond to the requests from the news media, from the televisions, radio, and the press. You were there to keep the families updated on a daily basis. You fielded a stream of calls from our families wanting to know what was going on, also the community officials and the general public. And it has to be done in one central place. It can't just be done by everybody or who happens to have the time. So I agree with you, Mrs. Snoblin. PR sounds like Lindsay Lohan to me, but communications department and director is completely different, and that's what we're looking for here. Any other questions? Then I would ask for a motion to approve the Whipple Consulting contract.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is the approval of the Allied Administrative Services Agreement. Mr. Simic?
Thank you, Mrs. Golan, and I'll hand off to Mr. Albus.
Thank you. The school district operates a self-funded dental program rather than buying a fully insured program. In addition, we have a flexible benefits plan, and with both those programs, then we need to hire a company to process claims. For the last 4 years, we've utilized Allied Benefit Systems as what's known as the third-party administrator, or the TPA. We're recommending a 1-year renewal with Allied. The rates during the 4 years that we've utilized Allied have not changed, and they would be held firm for this upcoming calendar year as well.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the Allied Administrative Services Agreement?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments from board members? Then may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is the adoption of the 2012 tax levy. Mr. Simic?
Thank you, Mrs. Golan, and again, I will pass off to Alan. I don't know if there's any further discussion needed.
Unless there's any additional questions, no.
Okay. Thank you. Then may I have a motion to accept the 2012 to adopt the 2012 tax levy.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Next is the acceptance of the 2012 audit. Mr. Albus?
You'll notice that the agenda says acceptance as opposed to approval, and that's because, as Mr. Carey alluded to earlier, this is an independent audit report. So it is the report of Miller Cooper. The board's action is just acknowledging receipt of that report, and then Miller Cooper has filed the AFR, the accompanying AFR with the state, but it is an independent report that you're simply accepting.
Thank you, Mr. Albus. May I have a motion to accept the 2012 audit?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any questions, comments?
Just want to say it's an audit to be proud of.
Certainly is. Thank you. When in doubt, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Now we have the approval of the Human Resources Report, and that's Jen Knight.
Hi, as you'll notice, our HR report is again comprised mostly of some maintenance items. So although it has been relatively few school days since our last board meeting, we have had some professional development opportunities I'll just update the board on. We did last week, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics had their annual conference in Chicago. We like to take advantage of when these big national conferences really focus on content area expertise and trends come into town. So we had 10 teachers go downtown over the course of 2 days and really get their fill of math. I'm sure you're all jealous. We also have next week 25 of the high school teachers going to Croya. Actually, Croya has offered their space to have these 25 high school teachers work with 25 District 67 teachers and have a 3-day workshop really focusing on the social emotional components of the classroom culture. It has been really proven out in research in the past 5 to 10 years that the climate of a classroom has a direct and significant impact on the learning that happens there. If you think about it in a commonsensical way, you can see the connection, but that has been a recent focus. So this is a 3-day experience that we're excited about, not only for that specific area of learning, but also for the partnership with our District 67 peers. We will also this Thursday have a luncheon for our new teachers and their mentors, take a couple periods out of the school day. Over the course of the last couple weeks, each of these pairs have had an hour-long meeting in which they basically have done a recap of the year thus far, not only a focus on how the new teacher is doing, but how the pair is doing in terms of bringing that teacher into the school culture and into basically growing as a new teacher in the district and in their own classrooms. So we're going to take some time and come back together as a group, focus on what's going well, what are some hints and pieces that they can offer one another, and how can we make this process even better next year as we start to move into some of our years of greater turnover within our certified staff. The last piece that we have going is we've done some initial planning on our Tri-District Institute Day. That's in February. It's with all three districts, 65, 67, 115. And we have done some outreach to speakers and hope to be able to give you a January update on the specifics. We are anticipating, probably no surprise after you heard Thor's report, that there will be a focus on the Common Core and some guesswork on what that might look like. As Julie told you, there's still a lot to be answered, but we are trying to give our teachers enough information that it's not a surprise when there does start to be greater clarity around it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Mr. Simic?
Yeah, I just wanted to say how great it is to hear the investment that we are making in our professional development for our teachers. The NCTM conference is one of the nation's premier places for math teachers to learn, and the fact that we sent 10 of our staff there is a tribute to our staff's willingness to engage in that, and also the eagerness with which we have to send them there. Really happy to see that. Also on the flipping training, it's easily overlooked that Lake Forest, and I wish that I could take credit for this, but this is a program that is, Lake Forest is a leader in looking into and then latching on to flipping training. And I have this person after person that has had contact with this training has said, hey, this is going to change who your staff is, and this is going to change how your students engage and how your teachers engage. And it is very, very important work, particularly in light of some of the challenges that the district has had. So again, Lake Forest is a lighthouse for Lake County and for the region, and you should be proud of that work and the fact that we're sending so many people to this training as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited about it.
Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, thank you. Oh, Monty?
Just a comment maybe for the board. It might be interesting to spend some time talking about this flipping training and to really have the community understand what it is that's being learned out there and how it might impact the school.
I was thinking the same thing, perhaps one of those future agenda items for the board. That would be great.
Can certainly do that. A report out would be a wonderful thing. It's something that we vetted pretty carefully last year, even more so than the financial kind of commitment you make to that. Taking the time, as you well know in schools, is the greatest commitment. So it's something that we looked at pretty closely, we're excited about, and it seems to fit nicely with the direction we're trying to move.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the Human Resources Report, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Next is the consent agenda. Is there any item that a board member would like removed from the consent agenda to be acted on separately? Seeing none, the first is the approval of disbursements, payrolls, and financial statement. The second is the approval of minutes from a regular meeting of November 13th, 2012, and minutes of an executive meeting of November 13th, 2012. There are no audio recordings to dispose of this evening. With that, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Burgener?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. There was one Freedom of Information Act request this past month, and that came from Lisa Black of the Chicago Tribune, which we took care of. Announcements. Wednesday, December 5th, that's tomorrow, is a late start day, beginning at 9:50 a.m. December 12th, board members, if you recall, we have a joint board workshop. You'll be getting more information on that. Sunday, December 16th, Mr. Simic, this is after tonight's board meeting, this is the second biggest day of the year at Lake Forest High School. It's the holiday concert and spaghetti dinner, which is so much fun. That begins at 3 p.m. with the instrumental concert. It continues at 4:45 p.m. in the cafeteria with the spaghetti dinner. And then at 7 p.m. that night, our holiday concert in the auditorium. Buy your tickets. It's open to the entire community. Do you have any comments, Mrs. Snoblin, on this?
What, did I look eager to comment on that? I was just thinking that also during the spaghetti dinner, many of the ensembles from the high school perform in all the different areas where people are dining. So you will hear the madrigal singers again, and you cannot hear them too many times. The bel canto singers, the jazz groups, many of the different groups do perform during the dinner as well as in the concerts. It's just a fabulous day, and the kids are so excited, and there's enormous parental involvement in that as well. So definitely, I can be, at this point I'm about 6 years out of the high school in terms of my kids, but I think for another 30 or 40 I'll continue enjoying going to the holiday concert and spaghetti dinner.
It really is a community program, so if there's someone that lives down the street and you're wondering what to do with them over the holiday season, I would invite them to this. Continuing on, Monday, December 24th to January 4th is winter break. Monday, January 7th, school reopens. That's 2013. Tuesday, January 8th, 2013 is our next Board of Education meeting here at the Lake Forest High School West Campus Boardroom. At this time, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.